So how do you paint a moody, atmospheric scene in watercolour? Well, watercolour is the best medium for doing this. It's fast. What I'm going to do today is put a wet in wet wash over this and build up a small painting with it. The colour choices I'm going to make are going to be sort of cool blue greys. So I'm actually going to use some cobalt here to make this, which is a bright blue, but I'm not going to keep it as a bright blue. So just a little bit of rose to make that go purpley, and then a touch of raw sienna, and that makes it into a blue grey. I'll start with putting that on the dry paper here. Now my board is on a slope, and that's fairly important. So any excess is going to run downwards, and I'm going to get a wet line all the way across the bottom here where the water accumulates. While it's wet, I can go back to the top and redo the top and keep going downwards. The water won't keep running down any further than that. Now if I keep going, that's giving me a nice smooth even wash, as you can see. So I've gone from here to here. I don't stop within the paper because I'd have a white line down both sides. So right across the tape in this case. What do I do if I want that to be a little bit stronger? I make a little bit more colour up. Personally, I tend to mix and remix constantly to get different variations. And there you can see that I've taken too much raw sienna and made that a bit dirty. So what do? I take more blue, pull that back, tiny bit more rose, pull that back, and before too long I'm getting closer again to the colour that I wanted. So you might make up a quantity of this, but personally I like to do it this way. Now I'm going to go back on this because I can make it darker at the top if I do that. What is also happening is my paper is buckling a little bit in the process, but I'm still getting that smooth, even graded wash, taking it all the way down. I'm going to lighten it a little bit as it gets down to the bottom, so I'm going to add more water. And you can see that that is going lighter and lighter as that comes all the way down. As it gets closer to the bottom, I'll add a little bit more colour back into it again. Now the lower part of the picture is going to be closer, so I can have more colour in that. I can have an increased amount of any of the colours I'm using. So if I'm using that mix with the raw sienna in it, if I increase the raw sienna, that immediately brings that foreground a little bit closer. What I'm going to do within this is add something into it. So I'm going to put down my large brush and get something just that little bit smaller here. That was a number 20 that I was using, a 20 round. I'm going to take one half that size, a number 10. And if I go and take a little bit more blue, now it doesn't matter really which blue you use. I'm using some cobalt now. Some ultramarine now. That was cobalt, that's ultramarine. Take a little bit more of that. I want to be still careful with the balance of colours. If I have this almost as wet as it is on the paper, it's going to run everywhere, which I want at this point. So if I put this in here, running all the way through it, I'm doing vertical marks, and that should give me a little suggestion of trees through the back. Let's take that all the way along here. I'm going to remix that slightly. As I said, that is what I tend to do. We'll add some more in, so that's a fractionally different mix. But you'll see here how much that is blending into the colour that I put on before. It also depends on the size of the marks you're putting in. So if I go in bolder and push that around, I'm getting larger shapes. A lot of that colour is running downwards, but it's also, because of the water that's on the paper, it's running into that water. Now I'm going to bring that down a little bit more. So let's take that all the way down here. You can see at the moment that it hasn't got enough pigment to take it further, but I can pull it down quite easily like this. This is painting wet in wet. What happens if I go horizontally with it? I come through like this. The same thing will happen, but it just means that I'm joining things together in a slightly different way. I'm going to increase the colour slightly now, as that's all fairly even. This is still my colour mix, the same colours, same 3 colours I'm using. I could have used the ultramarine right at the very beginning as well. I just personally like to use the cobalt because it's just a little bit softer. Now we'll add into it, that's a fraction stronger. So being stronger, it's going to stand out against the bit behind. There's a little bit more pigment, particularly the ultramarine in this, and I'm leaving it just that little bit smaller and weaker in the middle in terms of my shapes. We'll get some more in here. Now I have to just adjust the colour I've made again. So that's gone stronger. There's a little bit more rose in that mix. There's a little bit more sienna. Not deliberately, it's just that's the way that the mixing has gone. And what I'm doing now is I'm getting a build-up of layers. So the sky layer, the distant tree, that's the first wash. I've got another layer through here, and now I'm going stronger again with these slightly closer ones. It's looking a little bit like a snow scene somewhere in the northern hemisphere, or somewhere where there's a blizzard. If I do a couple of lines like this through it, that's highlighting the brightness from that first wash. And a slight diagonal here is helping to give a little bit of perspective on it as well. So we're sort of coming into the picture like that. So I've got these shapes which are coming lower, which means that they're closer. These ones are further away, and these ones are clearly coming from the bottom, these little mini diagonals, and they take me into the painting. If I put a smaller diagonal just in there like that, it's almost flattening out because it's near the horizon line, then that helps with everything as well. So I'm not going to add any large quantities into this now. I'm just going to go a little bit stronger again. So the whole thing is still damp, but I know that the area at the top will be starting to dry out on me. So I've got to be very careful about that. If I put any water up here now, the chances are that I'm going to get a run off that, and it will pick up pigment and give me a tide line. You might call it a cauliflower, and that will ruin that whole atmospheric look at the back there. So I don't want to do that. As long as I go back into this with increasing amounts of pigment and less water, then I'm going to get the effects that I want. Now I'm going to add in a stronger mix. So I have now made exactly the same 3 colours into a little bit of a dirty green-grey. It's just the same pigments. If I put that into here, that's stronger, and it looks considerably darker as a result, but it's still spreading because it's wet, and so is the area around it. This is all about watching paint move and paint dry. The old classic, watching paint dry. But with watercolour, it's actually a thing you need to be aware of. So having areas on a painting where it is drying out can be a problem, and you need to be understanding of that when it comes to how much water and how much pigment you are applying to your painting. So I'm going progressively stronger. You can see on my palette that it's much darker here now. I'm not using that much water. I'm getting a lot of pigment so that I can draw through the pigment like this, and it doesn't all wash together into a puddle. This is all still running down a lot. I'm going to put a few more marks in, couple of slightly stronger ones again. Like this. So I'm building up a little bit of a forest in the process. Now I'll pull a small amount of that down in a few spots like this, get some smaller marks going in. So I'm just using the point of my brush here for this. So I'm just dotting it in. Literally, I'm just touching the surface and the water is being picked up by the water on the paper and carrying it and making it run. This is a fun sort of exercise to do, I think, this sort of thing, because you're working so much with the water. You never quite know what's going to happen, so I need to be quite intuitive, just sort of watch what is going on and go with it. And just be thinking all the time about where a composition is heading. So obviously I'm trying to pull the eye into the middle here, because that's going to be pretty much a sort of a focus within this. And I'm just doing little bits of lead in with these small marks. The quicker I put that mark on there like that, the less pigment and less water is going to be dropped down onto the paper. Now I can see that this area where I've been putting a lot in is still extremely glossy wet. If I put my head to the side, the shine on it shows up a lot. Whereas if I do the same to the area above, that's gone into a sort of a satin look. So it is not as glossy, not as wet. The paper is still heavily buckled, so I know the paper is damp, but this means that I can put a mark into it with no problem. So I just do that and it will dissolve into it one way or another. Let's do that. But if I do that up here, it's not going to. It's going to just form a bit of a spot, and I've got to be extremely careful to avoid it, like I say. So I'm going to leave this at this point because I think that is enough for this stage, and I'm going to come back to it when I've dried it. So I've dried it off and the painting is now flat. The colours have lightened a little bit in the process. So where it was covered originally with that grey wash is now quite pale in relationship to the rest of this. The little bit of warmth that I put in the front with the raw sienna is showing through as a warmer area down at the bottom there. But the whole thing looks a little bit like a moody, snowy scene somewhere in a pine forest, which is great. So what am I going to do with it? Well, not a lot. I'm actually really quite happy to leave it like this. Every single mark is soft. That means that there are no strong, hard edges to it. But if I put one or two in, then they are going to pull the eye of the viewer. So what I'll do to add a little bit of detail is just put a little bit of a shape in here and there, like maybe a little growing thing. I'm being very careful and delicate here about it because I don't want this to stand out too badly. But we'll just have a little bit of a shape there. I'm going to just smudge that just to help to blend it in a little bit. But that shape does immediately stand out when I do that. So I've now got a sort of a deciduous tree growing there in amongst it all, I guess. Coming from the bottom. I use my finger like this just to smudge things. I find I can't help myself because it's just a really useful technique to blend things into their surroundings. A couple more things like this, just to put a little bit of something on each side. A little bit here. One or two down below. So these are just marks drawn straight on top, which are just trying to add to that overall effect of the shapes, bring a hint of reality into it beyond the fuzziness that I've got there. And I'm doing it carefully and delicately, as I say, because if I don't, then these marks will stand out badly, and because everything else is soft and it blends in, and that's why I'm taking a little bit of care and smudging where I need to. That's all I'm interested in doing here with this. A moody, atmospheric picture which has got full landscape in it, where I've got a range of tones going through it, from the darkest things which I'm putting on now to the palest things which are at the back there, like that. Done essentially in 3 colours. I did use 2 blues, but it's essentially done in just a blue, a rose, and the raw sienna as the yellowish pigment. And I've got this lovely variation in all those colours all the way through it. A lot of it you can actually see the different pigments, so I can see more blue there, for example. I can see more of the rose there, I can see more of the raw sienna there, so I can see the 3 pigments. You can take other pigments and do this as well. These are the 3 that I've chosen to use for this, but that gives me a full painting with predominantly soft edges and with atmosphere and a range of tone. So why not try something like this yourself? You don't have to stick to just those colours. Like I say, you could try other colours. I've used those 3 because they will give me a grey of one sort or another, and that's what I was aiming for. But you could do all of this with greens, for example, or browns, whatever you like. But it's all about having a certain amount of water and reducing it as you put your darker pigments in, your darker marks in, so that those stand out and you can control to a great extent where they are going. You'll see that these marks here, they've all got these beautiful fuzzy edges to them, but they are exactly where I placed them, and I could see how far the water was travelling in the process. So my brush was not wet when I did that, but it was very wet when I did all of this. And controlling that amount of wetness is imperative if you're going to understand how to paint watercolour. So experiment, do versions of this, do anything that appeals to you like this. This is quite quick. You can do these in 10 minutes. Just do several of them, and the more you do, the more you'll get an understanding of how the water is working.